This is Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review for the week of January 25th through 29th, 2021, and I am Steve Prentice. Every week on this show, I invite a guest to join me to talk about some of the stories that we have shared, my colleagues and I have shared on the Daily Headlines podcast, sharing expertise, insight, and awareness on the things that are happening in the cybersecurity world. If you are joining us live at this very moment, I invite you to also join the conversation as we go along by going to Crowdcast, and we have a channel going on there. And I also want to mention that we are sponsored for this show this week by Nucleus Security. They have a very interesting approach to vulnerability management, and I'll be speaking about that very shortly as well. So our guest for today, is someone who doesn't really require a lot of introduction, especially if you have been listening to Defense in Depth, where he's been doing a stellar job as the guest co-host. This is Steve Zalewski, who is Deputy CISO of Levi Strauss. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. And I do want to appreciate, Steve, and let you know up front that you wearing Levi's jeans right now. Thank you.
I am indeed. I'm sitting down, but I'm sitting on them, and they're doing very, very well. So let's get started. We've got a lot of stories to share today. So the first one that came in around Monday was about Tesla firing a new software engineer for allegedly stealing lots and lots of files, especially Python scripts, and shifting them across to his Dropbox folder. He said this was not done on purpose, but it was part of his onboarding process and wasn't even aware of the lawsuit. So, I mean, is this something that's really feasible? I mean, is this not what onboarding and probation of new employees should be about?
I would say it's definitely feasible, especially at Tesla. And here's why I take that. And I remind people that monitoring is not the same as blocking. Many high-tech companies like Tesla implicitly trust their employees and use security monitoring to trust but verify that the trust relationship has not been broken.
But this is like shadow IT here. I mean, we're talking about using Dropbox, which, I mean, if I was working from home, I'd get into a lot of scrutiny about that. So it just seems, I mean, trust but verify is a great mantra, and I solidly believe in it. But we're looking here at, just the layers of protection just being sort of just immediately sort of shattered by this easy upload, if that was actually the case.
Yep. Well, in this case, it now becomes a case of who do you believe? Because what you're seeing are two perspectives, right? The question is, how well does the company want to protect its intellectual property versus did the employee under probation legitimately make a mistake, right? We'll never know the full details that led to the termination.
Yeah.
But at face value, if you're handling intellectual property for a tech company, and you're a technologist, you should err on the side of caution to prevent just such a situation occurring, right? You know better. And what I say is an ounce of prevention on the part of that employee or contractor who should know better would have been all that was required to make this a non-issue. So, to me, I kind of go, you're walking in as a professional into a high IP environment. So while I feel for the employee, I'm not surprised that Tesla took such a proactive approach.
It seems to be that, again, we are looking at the experts, and sometimes they make mistakes, which leads us to the next story, which is that about the Google threat group, analysis group, warning of a social engineering hack, quite a fascinating one, actually, which was aimed at security researchers, pulling them in through a social engineering activity, really, of working on a project together and sharing files. And oops, they got caught doing this. The suspicion is this was a North Korean attempt, not at a direct target, but some almost like soft phishing to just see what's around there. So once again, we're looking at the experts, and they seem to get caught. I mean, how can they stay perpetually on guard? It's an impossible thing, I understand, but what should we expect of experts in cybersecurity to stay completely aware of these kinds of ever-changing phishing techniques?
So I go back to the old mantra, if it sounds too good to be true, then go with your common sense and avoid it. whether it's cybersecurity or anything else, right? Cybersecurity people are not unique. They're human beings like everybody else. They're prone to make mistakes. But common sense at the end of the day does have to dictate your work. If you're tired and you know you are, common sense would say you are susceptible, right? So it may seem surprising that the people are trying to protect us are falling for the same social engineering traps that they're trying to help prevent and avoid,
Yeah.
right? But people are fallible.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is altruistic intentions. You can argue, oh, but these people are really trying to do the right thing, right? Altruistic intentions are as powerful a motivator as any other emotion when it comes to making a mistake in judgment. And so I can't treat them as, any more responsible than any of the rest of us. And I simply say, yes, it's going to happen and we are fallible. And that's why I always rely on saying common sense. If it doesn't seem right, don't do it, right? Standard security awareness training.
It reminds me of the Twitter hack from last year. Again, you're looking at the sort of the pinnacle of companies in high tech and the social engineering that move people into hacking through the accounts of people like Joe Biden and Barack Obama with the Bitcoin scam. So yeah, I suppose the lesson that I would want to take from this is you have to stay on guard. It's a matter of training yourself never to trust again anybody who approaches you. At least do some sort of two-factor authentication in the real world to find out who you're actually working with. But if we want to move along for a second here, the other story that's really captivating people right now is the attack on Wall Street from the Redditors who have gone and boosted some stock and then taken a lot of hedge fund managers by surprise, the ones who profit from shorting on these types of things. Uh, I mean, obviously, playing in the stock market is not a new thing. It's been around since the stock market's been here. But what's the big deal? Why is this happening now? And why are people getting so upset about this particular incident?
So I will say I find this fascinating as well. It's a conversation I've been having with some of my folks around just this irrational, interest in some of these stocks. But I'm going to take a step back. And here's what I'm going to say. Pump and dump as a tactic to manipulate stocks is nothing new. It's been around forever, as you said. Okay. Another way, it is another avenue of accomplishing that. But the fact that TikTok sabotage, if you want to call it, of president's rallies, it's interesting coincidence, nothing more, right? On timing and everything. But what we're seeing is in this day and age, we're constantly seeing that social media outlets can be manipulated by a few to influence the many, right? Now, the other point here is, and they're doing it in any number of ways where malicious intent is the driving motivator. Okay. So whether it's the president, whether it's TikTok, right? People have a motivation that is not necessarily stellar, and they're realizing how to leverage technologies and social media and standard security. Manipulation of emotion. They're finding new outlets. And I think people are surprised sometimes. Same thing, right? That I said earlier, which is, well, if you're altruistic in your use of social media and you see people abuse it, well, it strikes you as just being wrong or surprised. But anything that can be used can be abused.
You know what? It reminds me, I mean, it's easy to go back to the TikTok story from last year, but what it reminds me more of is how Uber and then Lyft took over the taxi industry. You've got the taxi industry, just like the people who've ruled Wall Street for a century or more, all of a sudden being taken over by a bunch of smart people. And the big irony, or maybe the big good part about this, from what I have read anyway, is some of the people in these groups who are doing this Redditor-based attack on these stocks, if you want to put it as an attack, are people who've been laid off because of COVID and because of other cutbacks, and are suddenly finding that they can make a habit and a hobby of playing the markets from the kitchen table, and hey, they're making some money. So to me, I think that's an interesting new development of the old guard being pushed aside once again by a new group of people. So it's still happening. I think as of later today, Robinhood has issued some kind of throttling on the trading, which again is questionable in terms of, is this for safety? or is because they have lost control of this particular incident. So interesting stuff happening there. And just moving on to the next one I want to look at is Twitter Birdwatch. We spoke about Twitter Birdwatch, I think, on Tuesday. And this is something that, to me, speaks to the notion of the Twitter and other social media platforms like this were at one time just a deliverer or an arbiter, let's say, of people's comments. And now they're moving a lot more into actual ruling and deciding upon what goes through. So what are your thoughts about Birdwatch?
So, I'm gonna start with, what can security do? What is security's responsibility? Security practitioners like myself have the ability to provide people, process, and technology to address the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of data. Okay, we have a goal, we have an objective, we have a way to do it. That's the extent of our charter and capabilities, right? Given the requirements, we can do it. Social and political policy decisions, like those above, okay, will influence our ability to provide these capabilities. Because if they tell us it's okay to violate one of those precepts, we will. But deciding who or how the ultimate provider of truth is either created or arbitrated is not a security function. Mm-hmm. So while I listen to these arguments, right, I simply say it's not a security function that we can do something about. When you talk about social and political policy and social, manipulation or social contracts to determine the truth of a statement, that's outside of our domain.
Right. Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to just take a moment here and address our sponsor for this episode. Our sponsor this week is Nucleus Security. And all this week on our daily news podcast, Nucleus Security has been sharing some anti-patterns in vulnerability management, such as relying on spreadsheets to track risks, for example, or relying on homegrown vulnerability management tools that were abandoned due to complexity or to cumbersome builds, and also the challenge of hiring enough vulnerability analysts to do triage. So what Nucleus Security would like is for you to come and learn how they can rescue you from these types of challenges and to provide the data insights that you need. So you can check out, they have a demo on demand at nucleussec.com. Check them out and learn what they can do for you with regards to vulnerability management. So now if we go back, and Steve, I wanted to now just bring you back here and have a look at our next story for the week here. And we're moving on to the case for standalone password managers. This, again, is something I've been very passionate about in terms of helping people understand the difference between working with a password manager and just simply memorizing passwords or writing password 123 on a sticky note and putting it under your keyboard, even if you are the admin. So do you think there's a lot of pushback? People are fearful not only of using and trusting password managers, but also letting go of the ability to remember and to know the passwords and to replace them with big, long strings of punctuation. So are they better in your mind, or should we move further into fingerprints and retinal scans and other biometrics like that?
I would say this is probably my favorite question so far. And here's why. I think everything that's said here is right. These are all options. But if you look at the problem, root cause, here's what we got. We're talking about a matter of degrees of trust. There's no silver bullet on the horizon that will magically address the wide variety of use cases and individual opinions as to what is correct. Because what you're seeing here is, what do you trust as an individual? What is your opinion on and what is reasonably trustworthy in your case? So ultimately, security has to be good enough for you, whatever good enough is. And that's the bar that should be used to determine what is appropriate. So everything here is a good answer. Okay. Because it's, what do you think is good enough? And you don't have to listen to a security practitioner. It's what's good for you. So I think of this as a risk discussion. And what you're deciding is how much money or time or anxiety, is it worth to you to find the right balance of the likelihood that your password or passwords might be compromised versus the possibility that they can be? So where's that middle ground? Where's that good enough for you? Well,
So good.
I do want to say here, right, is that I'm not answering the question directly, Steve, and I know it, because what we're talking about really is philosophy as much as technology. So guidance as perspective is the best I can do for this one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the thing is, the technology can be great, but you've got to get people to actually want to use it. So I think the philosophy component is very valid. Again, it's pointless having a rock solid security policy of any sort if nobody's going to use it, which I think is why people still write down passwords, even the admins. But once again, I think that leap is not so much trust being a leap of faith, but a leap of knowledge. People seeing how these technologies can actually work may be something that training and understanding will lead people towards this carefully and slowly. But I just thought it was rather interesting to see that this is something that is got arguments on both sides. So let's move to something more physical now. There was an outage in the upper New England states a couple of days ago, which didn't really sort of last long in the news, but it was quite substantial in terms of an internet outage. It affected all the big players, Azure and Teams and Slack and Google, and it was identified as being a cut cable in Brooklyn. So I just want to ask a purely physical question here. I mean, the internet, born out of the ARPANET, was supposed to be a centerless system that would be immune from this kind of cutting of a particular strand. So could this really have happened? One single cable can wipe out so much of such an important part of the northeastern North American economy and megalopolis that is this area?
So I'm going to start the answer to this. Say I spent almost 6 years at Pacific Gas and Electric while we were trying to secure the grid. So this one, being physical, actually has a lot of commonality with work I've done in the past. I'm going to answer this, given that I'm an engineer, I'm going to take the engineering out. And here's how I'm going to phrase it. Given my engineering background, my response here is that the system will respond as designed for the situations it was designed to handle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Unintended consequences are often observed, and you could argue this is an unintended consequence, right? When the system is put into a state that the designers either did not consider or where the design parameters were exceeded by either accidental or malicious means.
Yeah.
So you see this all the time. I mean, just look at all the cases where a design, unintended consequences created an outage, right? It just varies in magnitude. So while I'm personally confident, seriously, that we do not have a systematic or systemic problem of one cut cable away from Armageddon, like that.
Yeah.
We do have to acknowledge that people, process, and technology working in harmony is not a perfect science. So
True.
it's one of just, it's inevitable we can manage it, but it's a science thing more than anything else.
But where's the redundancy here? I mean, as an engineer, you would know that. I mean, obviously, you know that when you fly in a plane, you take great comfort in knowing that everything built into that plane has triple redundancy on it to make sure that you've got, multiple failovers. I still can't get the concept that, yeah, okay, we can cut a cable, which happens. The cable wasn't designed to be cut by a backhoe, but where's the redundancy that would have saved and rerouted the messaging to other places? I mean, is that an ignorant question on my part?
It is not. And where I'm going at is we had an outage, and you even saw in the news that they're not clear if the outage was a single event or whether it was a cascading event, right? Several of our power outages are a result of cascading events. It's the result of the designers not anticipating certain types of things happening, so that once you get out of bounds of the system, you get non-deterministic results, right? And so what I'm saying here is they're even alluding to that, which is we're not exactly sure what happened. We designed it so it can't, yet it did. Okay. And in security, this happens all the time too, right? How many times have, the impossible continues to happen? I've got locks on my doors. Nobody can get in, yet somebody did. So that's why, from an engineering standpoint, I have to say, if everything is designed correctly and everybody follows the rules, the system will work. In these cases, that's why it's not likely that it's going to occur. I'm sure you'll see the designs for normal cases like that. I will share with you an interesting thing. When I was at PG&E, they had a situation, right, that turned out to be malicious, where somebody with a high-powered rifle stood on a hill and shot out a huge transformer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They had all kinds of gates. They had all kinds of controls to protect that transformer so people wouldn't accidentally get in. They wouldn't maliciously get in. Nobody thought about a high-powered rifle half a mile away putting holes into the transformer. That's an example where, you would say, how could they possibly have had that outage? Well, they had redundancy and everything, but not against this case.
I've just finished reading Ted Koppel's book on just exactly that, on the grid and its vulnerabilities. And you're exactly right. I mean, that is sort of out of the scope of what you'd build it for. Well, Steve, this is as I expected it to be. We ran through a few stories here and had some great conversations on all of these. There were others we could have covered, but this was fantastic. And I would love to know, out of what we've talked of here, what do you think? I mean, what was your favorite story of what we've seen here? And if you have a favorite, is there in there a sort of a thumbs up, a good news piece, maybe even buried in some of the bad news, or is it a story that really is another eye roller?
So the one that really resonated with me, it was password managers, because it is the most practical of the four where people can actually do something. And my comment here about good enough security, and that's why, which was, many practitioners, right, always want to say, you can do more, you can do more, you can do more. Well, I think there's a pragmatic approach that says it has to be good enough. And so why I like this story is it allowed me to have this conversation around what's good enough, not what's nirvana. And I think that's part of the conversation we really need to reinitiate into a lot of these conversations, as security practitioners are quick to show that the sky is falling.
Very wise. So, Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure, as I knew it would be, to be working with you today. And I'd just like to know, what is your call to action? What would you like people to know about you as we finish up our show here today?
My call to action to everybody from a security standpoint is figure out why it's actionable. Okay. My question to all my security practitioners out there is, I ask everybody, how does what you do help me sell jeans? And my challenge to everybody is, as a security practitioner, ask that same question to your providers. And to the providers, I say, think about how your business practicality of your solution helps security.
Well, Steve, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure working with you today, and I look forward to listening to you as a guest host on Defense in Depth as well. So thank you very much for being with us here today, and I look forward to more wisdom from you in the future.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, Steve.
So it has been another week of busy stories, and there's no such thing really, I think, as a slow news day in the cybersecurity world. So I'm really delighted to have Steve here, and I'm looking forward to our next guest next week. I want to thank our sponsor once again, Nucleus Security, for helping us put the show on here today. And, the point about what we're looking at here is that keeping track of changes and keeping track of new developments, new technologies, and new people is always a vital component and a professional skill in and of itself. So to that point, I invite you to consider joining us on Fridays for our weekly video chat, where again, we have great experts, audience participation from people just following in and chatting. Tomorrow's session is on hacking BYOD and unmanaged devices, and you can find out more information at cisoseries.com. As for us, we will be back here next week, and I look forward to seeing you then. So thank you so much for listening. I'm Steve Prentice, and we will see you again. Take care. Stay safe.
From the CISO series, it's Cybersecurity Headlines. Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.